Time. Thank you very much. We now go to the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To get to the core of what a nation values, all one would need to do is look at what its government encourages in tax credits and deductions, what it penalizes, and who it decides to audit. Unfortunately, the biases and inequities embedded in our institutions and history pervade much of the present-day United States tax code. Earlier this year, researchers at Stanford's Institute for Economic and Policy Research released a study showing how our tax system disproportionately targets Black families. These researchers found that Black taxpayers were nearly 3 to 5 times more likely to be audited than non-Black taxpayers. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter this study into the record. The shocking thing about this report is that although IRS doesn't ask about race when a taxpayer is filing an individual tax return, IRS's automated selection system disproportionately selects Black taxpayers for audits. GAO has been looking into how IRS can better understand how tax provisions can affect individuals and families differently based on their race, their ethnicity, or their sex. Ms. Lucas-Judy, can you tell me about what the Government Accountability Office has discovered thus far?
So we have ongoing work looking at audit rates and audit selection and equity in audit issues, and that's something that we'll be issuing a report later this year or early next year. But as far as the information that's available to IRS or Treasury or others to be able to look at the potential disparities by race more broadly, we've recommended that Congress help facilitate information sharing between those who are between Treasury and Census and others to be able to do studies on inequities, and also that Treasury consider things other than imputation models to be able to do some of those studies.
Thank you. The racial disparity in audit rates is unacceptable, especially when IRS has chronically deprioritized audits on the wealthiest Americans. The number of people with incomes of 1 million has jumped 50% over the last decade, yet audits on millionaires has dropped by 92% in the last 10 years. And in 2021, a team of academic economists and IRS researchers found that the top 1% of U.S. income earners failed to report more than 20% of their earnings to the IRS. Ms. Lucas-Judy, GAO is planning to conduct more audit work on this topic, is that correct?
That's correct.
Commissioner Werfel, what data and evidence are you tracking to demonstrate equity is a priority at the IRS?
Yeah, first, Congresswoman, I want to acknowledge how important the question yours is raising.
Mr. Werfel, could you move the mic closer? Thank you.
First, I want to acknowledge how important your question is. Second, I want to acknowledge that our approach for case selection for refundable credits was racially biased, and we must change it. We have taken the immediate step of significantly reducing the number of audits of refundable credits and shifting that emphasis to high-end tax evasion. And we've also begun making changes to our case selection algorithms to refundable credits to promote equity against all demographics. And we've stated publicly that we'll be providing updates on how this is playing out. We're working with a variety of different external stakeholder groups, continuing to work with the researchers at Stanford. I am very motivated and very inspired to get this right.
Thank you. What would you say makes auditing these top earners so much more difficult?
Those audits are very complicated. The financial structures are complicated. They hire lots of outside consultants, lawyers, accountants. They litigate. These things take a long time, and unfortunately, as we've been talking about, in the 12 years that predated the Inflation Reduction Act, we weren't making the appropriate investments to keep up. Think about how different the world is in 2023 versus 2010 when our budget cuts started. Cryptocurrency, more international globalization of movement of funds. During that time, it became easier for wealthy individuals and organizations to work to shield their income. We have some catching up to do.
Thank you. President Biden issued his first executive order to direct federal agencies to examine their policies and actions and how they may create or perpetuate, however unintentionally, outcomes that are barriers to equal opportunity. Commissioner Werfel, I'm pleased to see that IRS is taking this issue seriously. Earlier this year, you wrote a letter to our Senate colleagues assuring them that you take the racial tax gap seriously. You've already mentioned some of the steps that you all have taken, and I appreciate you sharing that for the record. And I look forward to continuing working with you and with my colleagues here in Congress to ensure our tax system is fair and equitable for all Americans and not just the wealthy elite. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. The distinguished gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Werfel,